Good morning, and welcome to Chapel Chat. I'm Pastor Kevin Little, and this is the chapel at Ranch Hole First United Methodist Church. Now, I tend to try and keep these light, but recent events are making it very hard to do. Last week, we chatted about changing how we approach politics and treating people with a different viewpoint like they're actually God's creation as well, just like we are. So in keeping with that theme, this week we're going to talk about gun control and abortion. First, let me say that these are my perspectives. It's okay to disagree with them. It isn't going to hurt my feelings in any way at all. I respect whatever your perspective might be. So, let's talk about gun control. Oh man, those words just automatically make me cringe to say them because they've been all over the media in varying degrees for most of my life. And for those of you who are counting, I'm 46. So in one form or another, our country has been trying to decide what to do about gun violence for the past 40 years and probably longer. So let me start off by saying that I own a gun. Pastor Emily owns a gun. Mine is a Smith & Wesson 9mm M&P Pro. It's a fantastic handgun to shoot. Pastor Emily owns a .22 caliber Beretta Neos handgun. We both have our concealed carry permits. We appreciate firearms and firearm ownership. Within the past 2 weeks, there's been a mass shooting at a church in LA, a grocery store in New York, and a school in Texas. According to one statistic that I saw, but I've not verified it, there have been 212 mass shootings in the U.S. already this year, and it's only May. What is it going to take to change this? So far, we've tried doing nothing, and it's gotten us to where we are today. We argue about it loudly, but nothing actually happens. So what are we actually willing to do about it? Are we willing to give up our personal firearms? What about our constitutional rights? What are we going to do with that? The Second Amendment to the Constitution was added in 1791, and it reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, I don't often hear a reference to that first part about a well-regulated militia when people talk about the right to keep and bear arms. In my understanding of this, those two statements go together, and we probably shouldn't cherry-pick our Constitution like we do our Scripture. And most of you guys know how I feel about cherry-picking Scripture passages to make them mean what we want them to mean. If we're supposed to be able to own firearms for the purpose of joining a militia to protect our state, then I don't really have much purpose owning a gun. I'm definitely not going to join an Illinois militia to defend our borders against Indiana. Now, maybe I join in the fight against Iowa, but that's just because of college basketball. But even without consideration of the implications involving a militia in the Second Amendment, we have to think about what the reality was in 1791 when it was written and what our reality is now. At that time, firearms weren't capable of doing what they can do today. At that time, there were enough other things going on that students weren't being shot in schools, and random people weren't being shot in churches, or random people also weren't being shot at the grocery store. I see people say things like, well, it's not the gun's fault, it's the person using it. Fine, I agree with that. But at what point do we become willing to try to do something different? Today, I would happily vote for legislation to restrict gun ownership. I would vote for legislation for harsher penalties and crimes utilizing a firearm. I would vote for legislation that would remove guns from the street. And in support of that legislation, I personally would hand over my firearm as soon as it passes because it's time to do something different. Doing nothing at all has gotten us to where we are today. Other civilized, world-leading countries don't have this problem the same manner that we do. And it's time to start looking at what our neighbors are doing for inspiration. And so now we'll move on to abortion. Holy cow, what a hot topic this is, and it's only going to get worse based on what we're seeing from the leaked Supreme Court documents. Now, I'm not going to dive into all the various understandings of this very complicated issue. I will say that I consider myself to be pro-choice simply because there are situations that arise that are not black and white decisions to make. In most everything that we do, there are gray areas that have to be accounted for, and that is definitely the case on this one. But if we, or as a country or individual states, are going to make abortion legal or illegal in all circumstances, what are we willing to do to make that work? Are we willing to adopt children that we are too old to raise in order to allow for that child to live? Are we willing to set aside our plans and ambitions to raise someone else's child? Are we willing to change our systems so that there are more and more better ways for our communities to take care of the children that are slipping through the cracks now and to prepare for the ones that are still coming in the future? If we're going to look at a woman, whether they are young or older, and tell them, I'm so sorry that you were raped, but you have to carry this baby to term no matter what that means for you, what are we willing to do to help? If we're going to look at a 13-year-old girl and tell her that she has to carry her father's baby to term, what are we willing to do to help that baby grow up? And how can we not stop and think about what kind of damage that process does to these women when we say it? I like babies. I do. I want all children to have a chance at a wonderful life. I really do. But I also know my own limitations. I don't know that I am capable of opening my home to a child at this time in my life. I don't know that I should have been trusted to raise my own children, if I'm being honest. And if I'm not willing to take steps to make sure that a baby has a fighting chance in the world, then I cannot dictate what a woman decides to do about that baby. Jesus walked among us to change the world. Our wonderful Trinitarian and comprehensible God took drastic steps to give us a fighting chance. Jesus, in his humanity, took on the task of openly challenging a system that wasn't operating properly. He spoke out. He fought for change. He inspired people to listen. He took action, and that system executed him for it as an enemy of the state. That's who we say we follow, but are we really willing to step out and risk our lives by changing the world around us? Pastors are often told to stay away from these topics or other political concerns. We're told to stay in our lane. Talk about Jesus, talk about salvation. Jesus talked about challenging the existing system. Jesus talked about putting humanity first and the importance of all lives. Jesus forced the existing church and government authorities to focus their attention on themselves, and when they didn't like what he said, he didn't sit back down and hush. He kept pushing. If we want change in the world, are we willing to follow his example? Thanks for joining me for another Chapel Chat. I'll see you here again next time. Have a great week.